Okay, hello and welcome to this session where we're going to just have a quick look at some of the robotics at the University of Hertfordshire. This session was previously done live a few days ago, and we're having a bit more interactive session where we get students to be involved using Mentimeter and asking questions. So something that may be a bit different from how we normally present it, but hopefully you find this session interesting. And yeah, let's get ahead. So I'll firstly really briefly introduce myself. I'm John. I'm a lecturer on the Robotics and AI course at the University of Hertfordshire. My research is kind of aimed at biologically inspired and neurorobotics. This is kind of robotics where we take inspiration from the brain, inspiration from different neural structures, and try to generate robust and adaptive behaviors. So I did my PhD at the University of Hertfordshire, and I worked there for about sort of 4-ish years. And then after that, I was at the University of Leeds, where I've been working as a researcher in bio-inspired robotics. And then about a few months ago, or 5 months ago now, I returned to University of Hertfordshire as a full-time lecturer on the Robotics and AI course. So at the University of Hertfordshire, we have quite a interesting, quite a diverse group of robotic research going on. So we have the robotics and AI kind of infrastructure or the research which I'm involved in. We have quite a bit of robotic sports and robotic competitions. We have a lot of research in social robotics. We have research in VR and teleoperation robotics. And we have bio-inspired robotics and bio-inspired control and neurological robotics. So there's a big diversity in our sort of different research groups and different expertise. So there's a lot going on here. So the first thing I'm going to do really briefly is kind of introduce you to the robotics and AI course, which is again the one I'm one of the main lecturers on, and it's kind of this very new and novel robotics research and robotics course where we're kind of trying to develop a very much a hands-on practical approach to education and robotics, where we have our students learn to build and develop robots from a very through the complete process and actually program them as well. So the kind of ideas on this course is really emphasizing these notions of cheap sensing, cheap computation, and cheap price, but while still kind of maintaining these really robust robots that operate, in a vast range of real world settings. And critically, to have these robots be fully embodied and have all computation occur on board. So we're trying to look at, sort of these fully autonomous robots which can navigate a wide range of environments. So I've been working on robots which operate on streets or in houses, and they're not tethered. They don't need any user interface, any user control, any signaling. They just simply go, and they can operate for extended periods of time. And they're obviously we want them really robust and long term. So in this image here, the first image we've got one of the robots that we actually have our students build. So the students are, they develop these by themselves, and they have all the parts. They sort of actually 3D print the chassis. They kind of wire the sensors, and then they actually program the robot itself using a range of behavioral robotics approach. Um, so we normally use I often use the Pi Zeros. Do I have one on me? So these are these really small microprocessors or computation devices. So they have the Raspberry OS on them. So they're really small. And the other things we use are the ESP32s, which are again even smaller, and they're completely everything's programmed on board. At the bottom, we've got this nice little picture showing some of the parts we may use. So it's we use everything when we build these robots, and we build them from scratch. And then the top sort of picture here is it's one of the robots I built myself, and I've used on a research project very recently, and I'll talk a bit about that a bit later. So again, this is just a really quick overview of kind of the robotic, the RAI, and this hands-on approach we use for our robotics here. Okay, so this is one of the questions we normally ask. Is I would ask the students to think about why would we want to look at actually cheap sensing and cheap computation? I mean, we live in a world where we have Boston Dynamics. We have these really robust and multi-dimensional, axis and robots which can obviously they can navigate in vast range of terrains. So why are we saying, hang on, we want to look at cheap, we want to look at low cost computation? And the simple reason, and one of our main reasons, is the idea of autonomy. And you can obviously build these really complex robots in complex environments, but the amount of data that they require to navigate. So the vision systems, if you consider the bandwidth required to, send a 4K image, into a processor, and then the amount of processing power, the amount of GPU power needing to process that image, it's phenomenal, and it exponentially grows to the kind of state where these robots aren't really reliable in real time. So you have to ask yourself, hang on, can these robots actually move and avoid a person if a person comes and tries to interact with them? So we really want our computation sensors to be really robust and cheap and relatively responsive. So I mean, just to give you a very quick example of this, we a project we worked on with using hyperspectral vision. It required the 40 minutes of vision or stereo vision that was recorded required, I believe, about 3 weeks to actually process on a dedicated computer. Now, obviously, if we want our robot to operate in real time, we need that computation to occur instantaneously, and we need all the processing to be done straight away. So I'm going to give you a really quick example, actually, of one of the projects we've been working on with these small robots, and just to kind of show you and highlight how robust they actually are. So this is the small robot we have here. I'm just going to start the video. So as you see, that we've got this robot is going through a maze, and this robot's actually been trained to find bananas. So as you can see, first from the start, it's able to navigate relatively quickly this not the easiest maze in the world, and it's able to find a banana. Now, what you'll probably notice here at the end is the actual box containing the banana fell on the robot. And what we want to do here was to look at this idea of ongoing learning. So here we have the robot, it's navigating and it's actually learning. It's learned beforehand to find a banana or to look for bananas in its environment. But we want it to actually learn from experiences and realize that maybe, the environment isn't always safe. So again, this is, I think, the 7th try I mentioned before, and the robot, again, it falls into the trap. So here we go, it's the 12th run. And what we'll see here is, I'll let the robot go through here quickly. So again, just to note, it's a really robust navigation. It's able to go through this relatively complex environment. You can see an example of the vision down the bottom corner to give you an idea of the processing power. And at this stage, the robot has actually learned, hang on, if I see that box near a banana, that's a trap and I'm going to get stuck. So I need to look for, the banana where there isn't a box surrounding it. So this is an example of ongoing learning, which is something we feel is really, really important. So, obviously there is a case often in robotics, you train a robot to work in a lab environment and you can train it to do a task really, really well. But what happens when you take it into the real world and, the environment isn't as, it's dynamic. There's a lot of moving parts. Maybe it could be something as simple as a door being replaced by a glass door being replaced by a wooden door, or a wooden door being replaced by a glass door, and all of a sudden your robot may not be able to operate properly because it's learned to navigate based upon a very set environment. I can actually give you quite a good example of this. So I know there was a robot we had at the University of Leeds which had learned it used a technique called SLAM where it mapped the environment, and it had learned that there was a glass door at a certain place and a wooden door at a certain place, and it would not try and go through the door go through that corridor if it saw the door was closed. Now, one day that university, the hospital that the robot was running in, they replaced the wooden door with a glass door. So the robot, obviously, with its sensors, it saw straight through the door and it didn't register the door there. So it drives straight through the door and smashes the glass door, which is, this is this big reason we need, this ongoing learning, and we need to learn how the robot can be situated in the environment and actually be part of our environment. So that's a really key, especially for my own research, something I'm really interested in. So I'll talk about some of the other research we've got going on here as well. So something that the university has been really, really successful in is our Bold Herts robot football team, which I think is very, very cool. So we have these humanoid robots down in the corner. I'll just play the video. And they're kind of challenged to, essentially, it's a game of football. I believe it's 5 players possibly. And yeah, it's, and what I would normally ask you to do here is to think about some of the actual challenges that they have to consider. So, a lot of the things we notice is that, you need to plan out each robot's behavior, how the robots work as a team, how they respond to changes. So, obviously the ball is a live moving object, so you need to plan your motion, and you need to plan where you're going to pass to, where is your team member. So it's this really, really complex problem, which, it actually has a lot of kind of carryover into other scenarios. So football, getting a robot to learn to play football is a great way of actually developing algorithms and skills that can be really useful in real world environments. Now, I think something that's very, very cool about these, and you may notice, is you have the goalkeeper is constantly scanning its head left and right, if you can see in the background. And that's to kind of help, it's to provide an overview of where its players are, and to communicate with the other robots and let them know where you are, where the other team is, and to try and look for opportunities to exploit in your environment. So again, it's this really, really great example. And obviously some of the big challenges here is, again, the fact that you have to the robots have to be really, react in real time. If you spend too long trying to kick the ball, then another team's going to move to kick the ball before you, or they're going to tackle you, or they're going to move, away. So it's this whole sort of returning back to this idea of a challenge. So the other really, really big area we have is the idea of social robotics, and one of those is the actual university has this robot house, which is, I believe, home to around 8 or 9 different robots. And it's designed to really understand and to study how robots may be used in our own environments. So particularly in our own house. From my knowledge, again, I'm not actually involved in the Robot House project, but there's been 2 major EU projects at the Robot House, which is the Accompany project, which is looking at how robots be integrated to support elderly users in their own home. So I think it's actually quite a good example here in the video, so I'll play the video quickly. So here we have the user may have something heavy, or something, maybe he needs to be very stable, say a hot cup of coffee or tea, or again, just maybe something very heavy. So the user can pass this to the robot, and then the robot can carry it to the user. So it's one example of how we can use robots to improve our daily life. So again, here we go. The robot is really able to robustly and relatively quickly bring the object to the seated user. The other project the robot house has been used for is the LIREC project, which is used for, again, it's not so much the elderly, but just generally looking at ways in which robot technology can be used to assist people in the home environment. So again, it could be a case of being able to carry something heavy, or carry something that needs to be delicately to someone, or it could be a case of maybe just monitoring that person or providing comfort. So, if you're maybe you're a bit nervous about being in the house by yourself, or you might have some underlying health conditions which could be worrying to you. You could have it might be useful to have a robot there which can kind of keep a track of you. So again, these are the different robots we have at the robot house. So we have everything from Darwin's, which are Dexters, which are sort of humanoid robots of manipulation, to Turtlebots, which are wheeled robots, and Pepper, again, which is you may have seen Pepper, it's quite a popular robot. But there's a lot of sort of very humanoid and very dexterous robots there. So one question I always like to ask people is, if you saw Pepper, would you actually want her in your house? And generally, a lot of people, obviously, the younger you are, a lot of people tend to be, yes, that's very cool. But there's also tends to be a lot of people talking, actually, it's a bit creepy. It looks a bit strange. I don't feel comfortable around it. And it's quite interesting because there's a lot of study actually going into this, which is known as the uncanny valley, where the more humanoid a robot looks, the more creeped out we feel, or the less comfortable we feel around it. So again, this is a major area of research and kind of work we do, is looking at how can these robots be more acceptable, different approaches, because it's so a lot of research maybe kind of there's a couple of groups dedicated to emotion, or kind of implementing feelings or emotion in a robot to maybe help with acceptability and help us feel more comfortable around them. So it's not just this cold staring robot looking at you, but rather it's a robot where you feel there's a need or an affinity towards you, and you can actually maybe develop a sort of relationship. So yes, it's quite really interesting. Is this idea of the uncanny valley, where again people may become uncomfortable around a certain robot. And it's also really interesting the fact that your culture and your early life experiences seem to really affect your position on this uncanny valley. So in countries such as Japan, where sort of android robots are very much ingrained in the culture from quite a young age, and obviously in the animes or the mangas, where it's a, or even just in the general life, if Japan and Tokyo in particular have a lot of robots, and they're a lot more common. I think they even have cases of some robots working as vehicles for disabled people to actually work as waiters. So you can work at home. Someone could be at home and they can control a robot waiter. So because the culture and over there is much more familiar with robots, you don't tend to get this uncanny valley. People aren't creeped out, and there are some I don't think I have the slide here, but there is some robots which are very lifelike, and to most Westerners or especially Europeans, we are completely off put by them. But to the Japanese, because they're much more familiar, they don't. It's not a second look as such. So again, it's really interesting and sort of researching how we can get these robots to embed in our environment. So again, this actually gets nicely to this next slide. I'd forgotten about this one. So again, one of the ways we can, try and get these robots in is to, to look at developing emotions. And maybe that, so I'll give you an example here. So we have this, this sort of the Sony, I forgot the name now, the Sony dog robot. I think Albo, maybe Albo. Anyway, and it's very simple. You just put some basic emotions into the robot. So we have the wagging of the tail, the cocking of the head, the looking around for the person, things that the robot maybe doesn't need to necessarily do to do its task. But it kind of builds this familiarity and this bond with you as a user. So here we have it's something very simple like the tail wagging here. It creates this this affinity, this emotion. So it's a really good way of encouraging interaction in users. And another really big reason we like looking at emotion is a way of understanding our own development on our own learning. So if we can kind of put in certain aspects of our own cognition into a robot, we can actually see, maybe try and make sort of understand how our own intelligence or our own cognition actually emerges. So this is actually one of my very old experiments I did when I was a PhD student, which was to use this embedded learning technique where we could try and understand how our early life experiences could shape our emotions. So in this case, we have a scenario where we had someone who was quite rough with a robot. They were quite abrasive. They would move very quickly. They would pick the robot up, throw it around a little bit. And then we had someone who was gentle and played with the robot in a nice and relaxing manner. And what we noticed was the robots themselves, and as they kind of developed and they learned, we actually were able to build very different personalities. So we have the robot here, which has been with a aggressive caregiver or a hostile caregiver is what we call it. We'll try and avoid any interaction with a person. Whereas the other robot, which has been with someone who's a bit more caring, a bit more gentle with it, and actually looks at the robot's needs, you can actually see here the robot is actually trying to engage, and it creates this real bond and fondness level, which is really nice to see. And it's a potential way that we can actually bring robots into our house while also then kind of understand our own development. So the other kind of major theme we have is looking at how robots can be used with children and with children's healthcare. So we have two major projects that I'm aware of right now, which is Casper, which is the top picture you have here, and we have Robin, which is the bottom picture. Now, obviously, Robin is a commercial robot which has been repurposed for this particular project, but Casper has been built by the University of Hertfordshire on site and has been built specifically. So what I'd normally ask students to do here is maybe have a couple of guesses looking at Casper and try and suggest why has Casper been built the way he has been built. So Casper has been built specifically to help children with autism, and he's been designed to have a very appealing body for those for people with autism, in particular very limited facial structural facial features, which has been found to be more appealing and more easy to look at. And I think something that's really, really amazing when you see children interacting with these robots is that they often are able to do so in a way which they can't with regular people, or they don't feel comfortable with. So it could be something such as just being, feeling comfortable to hold eye contact, or actually touch and engage. So there's a really nice video here of Casper in action. So obviously it's has tactile skin, so it can detect pressure, it can detect rubs, it can detect when a person engages with it. And yeah, so I mean, so in this case here, the nose was squeezed, and the Casper obviously responds in a negative manner. How you squeeze my nose, and it's provides this really good learning opportunity. But I should move forward a little on the video. So yeah, I mean, you have this wonderful opportunity and wonderful outcome of sort of these children being able and feeling comfortable to engage with Casper in a way they may not feel comfortable, and able to engage with the other children. So it's it's this brilliant opportunity to generate this platform to really help build and develop social skills. I believe that was, sorry, I was trying to remember the reporter's name. I believe it's Kate Humbleton, possibly. But yeah, so that's what Casper's been on a couple of big BBC programs in the past. So it's yeah, it is an amazing robot. The other robot we have is Robin, which is the other robot I showed you earlier. And Robin has been built specifically to try and help children learn to manage diabetes. So Robin is, interestingly, it's a robot that's actually been programmed to have a virtual form of diabetes. So it needs to eat to maintain a blood sugar level, like a diabetic person. So the idea with Robin is to create a robot which children can interact with and children can learn to care about, in order to actually gain a greater understanding of their own needs and how to manage them. So again, it's a very simple case of Robin will look around for food. It will tell you when its blood sugar is low. It will tell you when it's feeling tired. And then children can actually, learn, okay, what actions do I need to take? How can I help Robin in this scenario? Which, again, I think it obviously, because it's a robot and, children love robots themselves. It's a great medium to use. So you have children actually, really engaging, learning how to maintain Robin, which then obviously gives them a much greater understanding of their own needs and issues. So it's it's a beautiful learning tool. So another major theme we have is bio-inspired robotics and bio-inspired computation. So we have two distinctive labs. We have one group which is very much focused purely on biocomputation, and we have another sort of group which is focused more on biocomputation and robotics. So this is something I'm a bit more involved in. And so to give you an example of, one of the bio-inspired robotics projects we've been working on is, that I've been working on recently, is trying to look at how very simple neural structures can be used for robots, again, to keep in line with this earlier message of cheap computation, cheap sensing. So the robot we have here, sorry, not the robot, the organism, which has been kind of an inspiration for quite a lot of robots recently, is called C. elegans, which is a 5 millimeter long nematode. We have a picture of it here, highlighted in the blue circle, next to the £1 coin. So it's absolutely minute. And it's quite a cool organism in a sense that it's the only creature to have every neuron and every neural pathway actually physically mapped out. So it's a case we know where every neuron is and roughly how it interacts with the rest of the system. So we know that we can pinpoint this neuron is called A, this neuron is called B, etc., etc., and we know how they respond to different environments, and we can have a really good guess and really good understanding of the actual function of that neuron. So it's been a major area for robotics and neurocomputations, because it's the only free moving organism with all of this fully mapped out. So what I normally do is that I would like to, at this stage, I would ask students to have a rough guess at how many neurons C. elegans has. So I've given you the example of, the number of neurons in a honeybee, the number of neurons in a cat, and the number of neurons in a human. So here, we have so many neurons ourselves. So when we get to C. elegans, it actually has a total of 302 neurons, which is almost, it's when you think of how many neurons we have, it's an absolute minuscule amount. Yet with those 302 neurons, this organism can, is able to navigate and show really complex and dynamic behaviors in a range of environments. So it's really kind of eye-opening in the sense that it's something so small and something so, with such small computation can actually, be really robust and dynamic. And this is kind of a really interesting area for us, as roboticists, to look at how we can build, robust robots themselves. So this is an example of a project I was recently involved in at the University of Leeds, where we built essentially we took the neural system from C. elegans, and we took, I think, a handful of them, maybe about 7 or 8 neurons, and we implemented them in a robot. And what we found was not only was this really, really adaptive and allowed for really robust behavior, but it could actually be repurposed. So we took the neurons associated with food, and we trained them a little bit. We changed the way they were connected, and we actually got them working to detect cracks on roads. And what's really interesting, if I play the video, is the actual behavior we see is almost identical to the actual C. elegans itself. So we see 7 neurons or 8 neurons. The robot's able to demonstrate the exact same adaptive behavior, and this is a kind of ongoing project where we're getting upwards of 80 to 90% detection of all cracks on up to 5 kilometers of the road. So we can let this robot out on 5 kilometers of the road, and we can relatively within good estimates suggest we find all cracks. So it's really interesting how you can take these really small kind of neurons and neural structures and actually repurpose them to be really dynamic. So again, I think this is the last major area we have at the University of Hertfordshire, is the idea of virtual reality and teleoperation control. So this is kind of looking at ways in which we can. Sorry, let me play the video. So this is kind of looking at, again, so virtual reality would be, for example, the case here is a student has the VR headset and is able to actually sort of program the camera or the sensor, the actuators, and is able to move them directly by moving his head. So he's able to create this, able to pan around and focus on key areas while the robot isn't actually immediately in front of him. So it creates a lot of opportunities. I mean, if you can imagine, again, I think the example I mentioned earlier was in Japan, where they have examples of sort of humanoid robots working in shops or in restaurants, where maybe someone who's working from home can control them. So it's an ability for people to actually get out there and get involved in the real world. Now, the other thing as well, which is really, really useful, you can actually use this as maybe a way where it's too dangerous to put a human operator. So you can imagine in bomb disposal. I think the big one right now is obviously space exploration and nuclear power plants. So you can develop these remote robotics, which are able to go where it's maybe a bit too dangerous for us to go, or maybe it's not viable to send a human user. But with the VR headset and with teleoperation controls, you can do relatively complex tasks using the robot. Maybe tasks you wouldn't necessarily want the robot, trust the robot to do by itself. And another big thing is using teleoperation is also look at integration with sort of mobile devices and other devices. So it's a really nice example here is using SLAM. There's actually 2 aspects here. So SLAM is, just to briefly mention, is where you take a robot and able to explore an environment, and it creates a map using its sensor reading. So it kind of builds this picture of how the outlay of the environment, where are the walls, where are the key objects to avoid, and it can plan its pathway between them. Now, what they've done here is they've taken a bit further, and they've actually looked at integrating mobile control. So you can, I say, the accelerometer, in order to navigate and move the robot. You can obviously, add buttons. You can add, voice, microphones, and it gives you that opportunity to actually engage and control the robot from, without needing to be there yourself. So it's really, really useful when you want to do more complex tasks. So I think that's roughly brought me to the end of this talk. I believe my email address is at the front of the course. I'm more than on the first slide, so I'm more than happy to take further questions if there are any interest in sort of what we're doing at the moment. If it's not there, it is j.l.ones. So it's j.loans3@herts.ac.uk. So I'll just finish it off again by kind of briefly mentioning, sort of this the BN's Robotics and AI course we're currently developing. So I believe it's one of the few, or possibly only one in the UK, where the whole course is, kind of built around its hands-on project-based learning experience, where we have students build and develop the robots from scratch, and which is used throughout. So in the first year, we focus more on getting the key skills, how to build, how to develop, and how to program different sensors, use cameras, use ultrasonic sensors, distance sensors, infrared sensors. And then we begin to look at actually how we develop and how we can program relatively advanced behaviors in them. And, there's obviously the full, there's a range of different modules I'm only involved. I tend to be more involved with the behavioral or the neurobotics, but obviously there's a lot of industry-based projects ongoing. So it's, yeah, it's a very interesting course. So if you do have questions, please feel free to ask.